You mentioned spoken word. What are your thoughts on incorporating hip-hop as a form of culturally relevant pedagogy in urban schools?
I think we should incorporate all kinds of things that are relevant to kids, from hip-hop to, here's the rule of thumb for me is, the way kids learn in school needs to look much more like the way they learn outside of school. We have kids coming to school who have memorized the lyrics to hundreds of songs. What does that tell you? They have the capacity to retain information. Right? Now the question is, how do we get them to retain other information? I've seen teachers who use hip-hop to teach kids the periodic tables. Right? I mean, but not merely hip-hop. I don't want to get some people say, I don't like hip-hop. Then use cooking. Right? I work with a school in Queens, Renaissance High Their most popular extracurricular activity in the school is a cooking class. Kids are lined up. Why? Because it's taught by a top chef from a gourmet restaurant in New York. And kids watch that stuff on TV. They want to learn about cooking. He's also teaching about health. He's also teaching them about hygiene. He's teaching about a number of things through cooking class. So meet the kids where they are is what we've got to do. In too many schools, we expect the students to learn the way we teach. And if they can't do it, we say something's wrong with them. And in fact, what schools should be doing is how do we teach the way they learn? Because our kids don't learn typically like this. This is not the way most people learn, sitting and listening. It's got to be much more interactive, much more active. And I think if that were to be the case, if our classrooms came to life more, if students had more ownership over their learning, then I think there'd be more willing participants in learning as well.
Why isn't hip-hop accepted and adopted by the U.S. government, the Department of Education? And it seems that given our failure with certain populations, as you said, black and brown kids, that we would try a different approach. Our approach instead has been, okay, they're not doing well with this, let's double down on it, right? Which means that we're not really trying to help. We're not really trying to help these kids. We're simply reinforcing, a status quo, where these kids constantly, see themselves in the bottom rung. Social reproduction is what sociologists call it. And that issue of social reproduction by design, leads to conspiracy theory. I'm not going to go into conspiracy theory. I can go into that. But social reproduction as a result of structural inequity, is a system, is the system that we're in. And our inability to reverse it and our inability to think beyond it is problematic in some other ways. We don't do hip-hop in schools because we still live in a society that's racist, that's xenophobic, that's homophobic. For instance, they'll tell you that you can't do hip-hop in school because there's profanity in it. And yet you'll read a book in school like Catcher in the Rye, every other word is damn, and at the end of the book is fuck. They'll tell you that you can't do hip-hop in school, right? This is what they'll tell you. They tell you can't do it in school because, there's misogyny in it. And then they'll have you read Shakespeare in a play called Taming of the Shrew. Like taming a woman. Not even a woman, by that name. And they'll cry that hip-hop is misogynistic. They tell you can't do hip-hop in the classroom because it's too violent. And then they'll tell you to read about, the period of Americanization where the Western was being, narrowed. I call it Western narrowing versus Western expansion, because for a whole group of people it wasn't, expansion, it was narrowing. Tell you can't do hip-hop because it glorifies material, right? Bling. And yet we live in a capitalist society where the ideological diet is, glorification of material, glorification of bling. They tell you that hip-hop belongs in the street and that the school is a place for formal study. And yet they won't tell you that before, when Dante wrote the Divine Comedy, that he didn't write it in a high dialect. He didn't write it in the school language of the time. He didn't write it in Latin. He wrote it in Italian, the language of the hood, the language of the street. When Chaucer wrote Canterbury Tales, he didn't write it in the language of, high culture, the language of the conquerors. He didn't write it in French. He wrote it in the language of the people, the language of the tribe. He wrote it in English. And these are the texts that we study in school. So it's not consistent with me, the explanations that are given for not teaching hip-hop in schools. They're inconsistent with the reality of what we do teach in schools. Then that must mean something. That must mean the reason why we don't have something like hip-hop taught in classrooms is because there's something else at work. And what's at work, I believe, is essentially racist. It's xenophobic, and somehow by design, our education system and the formalized government, apparatus that runs that education system, is designed for certain people to succeed and certain people to fail. Well, this doesn't have to be conspiracy. Antonio Gramsci talks about hegemony, the success of a dominant group in projecting their values, beliefs, and dispositions upon the masses, whereby the masses consent to their oppression. It's like Carter G. Woodson said, if you control a man's thoughts, you don't have to worry about his actions. You don't have to cut one. You don't have to tell him to go out the back door. He'll go without being told. And if there isn't one there, he'll cut one out for his own special benefit. His education makes it necessary. And that's the miseducation. We got a system that righteously miseducates. So it's not that the Department of Education is broken. It works very well to the purposes of propping up a certain administration, a certain system of thinking, a certain logics in order to keep certain people down and certain people up.